religious states entrench patriarchal hierarchies, women can only achieve equality under secular systems of government. But let's settle a few definitions first. By women's equality, we mean that women should have the same legal rights as men. For example, freedom of movement and equal treatment in the courts. As for government, we feel there are two different types of government in existence today. Secular states, like France, which don't base their laws on religious doctrine, and whose leaders don't justify their rule based on affiliation with a religious institution like the church. On the other hand, we have religious states, like Saudi Arabia, which do base their laws on religious doctrine, and whose leaders justify their rule based on affiliation with a religious institution like the ulama in the case of Saudi Arabia. We will show you today how women's equality can only be achieved under secular governments because it cannot be achieved under religious governments. So I have 3 points for today. Firstly, I'll talk to you about how religious states makes the exclusion of women from politics worse. Secondly, I'll talk about how religious states dogmatically oppose women's equality. And Ashish will talk to you about how religious states prevent women themselves from seeking equality. So let's move on to our first argument for today, on how religious states makes the exclusion of women from politics even worse. My thesis is simple. Women can only achieve equality under secular states because, unlike religious states, there is no bias against them in politics. Let's understand that a key part of most religions is the belief in an afterlife. And it is the reward in this afterlife which influence what you do on earth. Therefore, in religious states, actions on earth, i.e. political decisions, will always be influenced by religious dogma. Its political leaders are also religious leaders. In such states, men can achieve positions of high religious power and therefore high political power as well. Women cannot, because most religions prevent women from doing so. Examples of such positions include the Pope, the leader of the Vatican City's Roman Catholic Church, or the Ayatollah, the supreme political and religious authority of Iran. We also see this trend in the fact that Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and Oman, 3 religious states, have absolutely 0 women members of parliament. Contrast this to secular states like Norway, which have 42.1% of members of parliament who are women. No thank you, sir. Therefore, we see as a result, in religious states, without this political office, women don't have the power they need to protect their political rights. This is even more so because in conservative religious states, the men are not expected to protect women's rights because men are conservative. Women must protect their own rights. In secular states, political office is accessible equally to both men and women. So women do have the political power to protect their rights. Furthermore, governments typically pander to established classes and interest groups because only such classes and interest groups have the political influence necessary for governments to remain in power. So because males are dominant in society, governments will pander to males. So males become dominant in politics as well. This is worse in religious states. Hold on a moment, sir. Precisely because governments have an incentive to pander to both patriarchal social structures and patriarchal religious structures. So men become dominant in society, politics, and religion. Yes?
Yeah, but for example, if you have a democracy, a democratic state, you have equal number of men and women, therefore women can achieve their own rights because there is equal number of them. They have a total equal vote as a man.
You see, the problem is, in most religious states, there is no democracy, precisely because your justification for ruling is not based upon the will of the people, but of the will of the higher power. That is why religious states like Saudi Arabia and Yemen are monarchies or virtual dictatorships. So moving back to my substantive point, because women are discriminated in society, politics, and religion, women don't have the autonomy they need to make even the most basic decisions in their daily life. So in Saudi Arabia, which has laws based on Wahhabi Islam, women are not allowed to drive or even seek jobs without their husband's consent. In contrast, in secular states, women can do these things just like men. Therefore, women can only achieve equality in secular systems of government, but never under religious ones. So let's move on to our second argument, on how religious states dogmatically oppose women's rights reform. Our thesis is simple. Women's equality can only be achieved in secular states because, unlike religious states, there is no bias against them in society. We must first understand that religion is fundamentally different from all other political ideologies because political ideologies are based on the real world. The effects of ideologies can be assessed using real-life evidence, so laws based on political ideologies can be changed through debate. Religion, however, is based on the command of the higher power in a non-physical world, and its legitimacy is based on the existence of that higher power, which is something you believe in, not necessarily something which is fact. Therefore, no thank you, laws based on religion can never be changed, because the divine justification behind such laws can never be disproven rationally. Also, such laws cannot be changed because religious authorities criminalize any criticism of such laws in order to prevent challenges to their divine mandate. Therefore, we see in Pakistan, it has an anti-blasphemy law which condemns any criticism of recognized religions like Islam, with penalties as severe as death. The problem is, religious states are inevitably extreme because only extreme versions of religion seek to impose its will in the law amongst all citizens regardless of their choice. Therefore, religious states, being extreme, will always use this law to discriminate against women, and this oppression is going to continue because such laws cannot be changed. So in 2007, an Afghan court sentenced a woman to 200 lashes of the cane precisely because she was committing the crime of premarital sex. What was the reality? She was actually a gang rape victim. So contrast this unfair practice to secular states like India, where discriminatory practices like female infanticide can be debated in parliament and then struck down. In fact, religious states are not going to change even under international pressure, because the threat of real-world negative publicity will never match up to the threat of divine punishment. So in Saudi Arabia, we see that the king has opened up mixed-gender universities to counter Western criticism of its gender segregation policies. However, this measure has been condemned by prominent clerics like Sheikh Abdul Rahman al-Barak, who call for the proponents of gender mixing to be killed. So now they're thinking of closing the university. Furthermore, even if religions splinter into progressive groups, such progressive groups will always be persecuted by the current conservative government. Why? Because the government does not want its power to be challenged by an alternative version of the divine mandate. Therefore, in Pakistan, clerics in the town of Shab Qadar incited a mob to stone to death 2 members of the moderate Ahmadiyya Islamic sect. What did the police do? They merely watched. So we see, in conclusion, that religious states can never repeal the laws which fundamentally discriminate against women. Secular states can. Therefore, women can only achieve equality in secular states, but never in religious states. So what have I shown you? I have shown you that in politics, women in religious states will always be discriminated against because they never have the political power necessary. And then I've shown you in society, women get discriminated as well. So on both the grounds of politics and society, women can only achieve equality in secular states, but never under religious states.
The first proposition speaker for his speech, and I now call upon Jovan Djugokovic to open the case for opposition.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, Team Serbia has 4 main points for you. The first one, I will talk to you about what we mean by religion in an ideological context. I will also talk to you about what we mean by equality and its relationship to religion, and Stefan here will talk to you about why secularism actually harms equality and why democracy, rather than secularization, is going to help achieve it. But prior to that, a definitional clarification and some rebuttal. Well, Team Singapore presented us with a definition with which we generally agree. A non-secular country is a country which has a state religion, a country which has a church that is backed by the government. But, ladies and gentlemen, what we need to note is that Team Singapore subsequently based their case on the presumption that all such states have conservative governments which are going to oppress women, which are going to oppress people, and which will never be able to be overthrown, and which will never have the rule of law in those countries. But what needs to be noted, no thank you sir, is that Team Singapore apparently misunderstood their burden of proof. It is not their burden of proof to show that secularity, that equality can be achieved under a secular system of government. It is not their burden of proof to show us that equality hasn't so far been achieved in non-secular system of government, which is untrue, which will be shown in our constructive points. But it is instead their burden of proof to show to us that equality can never be achieved under a non-secular system of government. No, thank you, sir. And all of the examples that were cited are, first of all, not logically connected to the prospect of the case and are isolated cases. You cannot just talk about the Vatican and Iran, because those countries are theocracies. No, thank you, sir. And we do not necessarily say that you have to have a theocracy in order to have a non-secular system. And the statement about Norway having loads of women in their parliament yet being secular is factually untrue, because there is a state church in Norway, a church which is funded by the country.
Point of information,
sir. No, thank you, sir. And if a church is funded by the country, if money is provided to it, then it necessarily bears a relation to the country, to the government. Just a moment, sir. And lastly on that point, the fact that there is no democracy in countries which have a state religion is again factually untrue. And we will present some examples of our own in our constructive. But before I proceed, yes, sir.
Our definition of religious states was a government where the government rules by virtue of religious authority.
Thank you very much, sir.
Excellent. Are you making a definitional challenge, sir?
Enough, sit down. And speaking of which, yes, it can be argued that if a country operates in a secular fashion, seemingly independently from church, yeah, it is secular. But, for example, let's take United Kingdom. Right here in United Kingdom, we have laws which aren't based on God's laws, seemingly. But on the other hand, girls, if you get married into the royal family, you'll never become the queen if you're Catholic, for example. If you don't belong to the Church of England, there are only bishops of the Church of England in the House of Lords. And on all those points, it seems that one religion is favored over other religions. We insist that if you have a state religion, no thank you, sir, you necessarily have a non-secular country. And we will show to you that this, however, is not inconsistent with gender equality. Now, on our first point, what do we mean by religion in an ideological context? Okay, guys, what is religion? Well, I think you'll all agree with me when I say that religion constitutes a series of principles, which are manifested as a series of statements about this world, how this world is and how this world should be. Now, we think that religion has ideology as its basis. And what we think marks religion as a special category of ideology is that it tends to make statements from authority. Statements about the natural world in a supernatural context. Talking about natural law, which is supposed to be an innate morality. And because it talks about natural law, we believe that this is a projection of what society sees as natural values. Values that we should have. And religion tends, therefore, to reflect the values of the society. What society perceives as right or wrong. And we know this as religions were actually forced, contrary to what Team Singapore said, forced to liberalize as the society did. For example, Church of England now allows women bishops, which it didn't do. And we think, therefore, religion is actually a very nebulous ideology which tends to vary a lot with different interpretations. And it's very flexible. Yes, no thank you, sir. It can have dogmas. And sometimes the state religion may oppose social changes, but this, no thank you, this opposition is bound to change. For example, in the 1960s, the Church of England heavily opposed homosexuals. Right now, they are debating on whether or not they should have gay priests. And furthermore, the state in democracies, in liberal democracies, it is the state who tends to embody the values of the people, which is precisely what the church does. And therefore, the state and the church are tightly connected, and one tends to follow the other. So no, thank you, sir. And that makes the church even more highly malleable. And in states which are democratic and liberal, churches embody, among others, the value of gender equality, ladies and gentlemen. Sometimes, yes, we concede that churches can, in short term, slow gender equality, but they won't ultimately stop it because they are backed by the state and more definitively move towards it. And by moving towards the attitude of the state, no thank you sir, they move towards the values of the people which tend to gravitate towards equality. And other religions, apart from the religion of the majority, have to follow suit. That's, for example, why Catholics are more liberal in the UK than in Nigeria. And therefore, this validates this framework. No, thank you, sir. And on the second point, what do we mean by equality? How is equality related to religion? Okay, we've been quite theoretical so far, but now let's ground this debate in the real world. We agreed that what we want to do is eventually achieve complete equality. Total rights, utopia, in pay, perception, sexual relations. However, we realize that in virtually every single country in the world, this absolute equality is nowhere near achieved. But, therefore, we need to take a more nuanced view, no thank you sir, and look at how equality is achieved. Let's look at what countries are succeeding at creating this equality. For example, the World Economic Forum has established an index, a gender gap index, which is an internationally recognized assessment for assessing all the different problems with inequality. Pay gap, education gap, number of women in the government, no thank you. 5 of the top 10 countries for equality are non-secular countries with official state religions, state churches, which are funded by the state. For instance, Iceland and Norway, which are the top 2, and have their own state churches, have the index at 85%. So women are 85% equal to men, so to speak. A considerable difference to the secular paradise of Singapore, which stands at 69%. And now let's look at the Lutheran State Church of Iceland to illustrate this point a bit more. It actively promotes equality, has female priests, and has no problem whatsoever with Iceland even having the first openly lesbian prime minister. We think what has occurred is that the church accepted values which are advantageous to women because the society tended to gravitate towards these values. So, to conclude, 1. Gender equality is helped by the church, so we can say with confidence that equality is likely to be achieved in the long term. In a non-secular state. Moreover, 2, there is no contradiction between freedom of religion and having a state religion. While it might have anti-competitive effects on the churches in a country, it doesn't have an effect on gender equality. And just a final example, in Denmark, 2/3 of Christian theology students are women, and this undermines the patriarchal assumption of religion, and if patriarchy falls, so does the inequality. And if patriarchy falls, so must this motion. Thank you very much.
Okay, I thank the first opposition speaker for his speech, and I'd like to continue the case for proposition. I'd like to call upon Ashir Kumar.
Come on, guys. Let's be serious. Britain is not a religious state. Neither is Norway, neither is Denmark a religious state. Basically, they've tried to get around all the analysis Aldo brought you by basically saying, we do not want to talk about any of these countries because we're going to redefine what religious states are. So I have 3 basic questions, therefore. What is our burden of proof, and what is a religious state? Secondly, does religion really reflect the values of society, or is it rather a structure which attempts to define society through other means? Lastly, are there external forces which can force equality for women in these religious states? So firstly, what is a religious state? If you ask any man on the street what defines the nature of a government, he will tell you it's something like what the government does. It's something to do with the function of the government, the manner it operates, and the manner in which it justifies its laws. These are the very simple criteria Aldo brought up, and we think that they're fairly intuitive. In Britain, when we make a law, no thank you, they don't say, we did this because God told us to do so. That's not the justification which they use for their laws. Neither does David Cameron say, I am here because of a divine mandate. They do not make their decisions because of religion, neither do they justify their positions through religion. To the eyes of any common person on the street, that is what defines a state which is secular. We tell you exactly the same thing happens in countries like Denmark, in Norway, and in Iceland. So by the most intuitive criteria we can possibly think of, the form and function of a government, these states are not religious. But if you think that your state merely saying, no thank you, that there's a state-supported church, means that the state is therefore not secular, it's a rather absurd claim. Because many states do so for purely historical reasons. And those things, those historical connections, are purely tokenistic in nature. They do not in any way impinge on the decisions which they make and then impose upon the people within society. And if the function of society should in some way reflect what the government's ideology is, and if the way society is governed has nothing to do with religion, then we tell you neither can you consider that state to be religious.
So could you please elaborate a bit more on those historical reasons? Because the Protestant churches, which are endorsed by most Western European non-secular countries, are, a bit of a newer creation.
No, they're not new creations. The fact is, many of these countries had Christianity imported to them during the Middle Ages, or when England was a power and there was conflict between Catholic Spain and Britain. So we think there are very significant historical roots. Many nations think it's an important cultural part of their identity, so they fund it in the way they may fund certain traditional arts, in the way they have a language which is national because they think that's important. That doesn't mean, because I have a state language, I discriminate against everyone else in society who happens to speak a different language. That doesn't make me a state which only supports like white North Americans because one of my official languages happens to be English. So that connection is very tenuous, and you're accusing a huge swath of countries which support a huge number of cultural institutions of all being incredibly biased and unfair. No, they are still secular states. But even if we say these are not secular states, we do have problems. We do have very big problems with the fact that the Anglican Church does not allow females to be bishops, and that many of the people who sit in the House of Lords can never go there because they are women and because bishops have a position in the House of Lords. No, thank you. So if we really want to talk about those, yes, we do have problems with such states anyway. Second point of contention. Is religion merely a reflection of the values of society? They say that religion tends to reflect what society wants to believe, because it appeals to certain naturalistic laws. Yes, the problem is, religions were established hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, and these naturalistic laws they appeal to were all intuitive to people thousands of years ago. That's why in Leviticus, the Bible still says very clearly, the only person who can intercede between God and man must be a male person. That law is still there, it has never changed, and no kind of strange reinterpretation is ever going to change that fact. That's why religion is not something which reflects society, it's something which attempts to define society through its values. In fact, if you think about it, many of the people who defined these religions in the days when they were still emerging created religion precisely for the purpose, because they thought it was a useful tool of control for certain people within society. That's what happened in England, that's what happened in many of the Muslim states as well. So right from the beginning, religion was never a reflection of what society thought. The relationship worked the other way around. Then onto this issue of what can really force equality. And this really brings me nicely to my point of substantive, which is about why religious states prevent women from pursuing equal rights. And when I go into this substantive, I will be showing you why the external influences and forces that they want to talk about simply do not apply in religious states. My thesis for this point is that religious ideologies stymies attempts to formulate internal feminist movements by exerting a powerful psychological and social force on women. We need to acknowledge that women's rights movements have only ever been successful when women themselves played a large part in organizing such movements and galvanizing support. In the US, for instance, no thank you, the feminist movement succeeded in granting women greater divorce rights because the vast majority of women in the US supported it. It is only when the beneficiaries want it that such equal rights movements can succeed. However, religious states often succeed in dissuading women from calling for these equal rights by imposing vast legal and social-economic barriers. And such barriers are created, no thank you sir, by pressures arising from a combination of already patriarchal societies and the conservatism which is enforced and encouraged by the state. What are these barriers? Firstly, women calling for equal rights have to face an uphill struggle against a profoundly conservative society fostered by the state and all its attached institutions, such as religious courts. often calling for equal rights in religious states, means immediate and drastic alienation from your local community and family. Women are thrown out on the street, disowned, and left to fend for themselves. That's why in Afghanistan, women who attended a peaceful protest calling for greater freedom of movement went home and were beaten to death by their husbands. The second barrier is that the state itself harasses and oppresses women. That's why the 5 female protest drivers in Saudi Arabia were never heard about again, because they were simply put in jail. But lastly, and this is where I really want to clash with the logic, the state enforces these religions and wants to make them such an important part of society that it becomes normalized, that this oppression becomes accepted by women themselves. And this is the worst form of oppression we can conceivably think of. Why is this so? We pointed to the fact that in Saudi Arabia, for instance, the vast majority of women who subscribe to the state-endorsed Salafi school of Islam have been decrying feminist movements as intellectual colonialism. Even in universities, even in so-called halls of learning, top female intellectuals and professors like Faiza Al-Ubaidi and Samia Adham say that women need to be forced to wear a certain dress code, and that must be a strictly Islamic dress code. So if we want to talk to us about external influences, we need to ask them, if there's no internal impetus for these things to happen in the very first place, what makes you think that external benchmarks and standards are going to be able to force this sort of internal change when women themselves are very divided among themselves in religious states? Secondly, we'd like to point out not only are there internal barriers, many religious states are very hard for you to foist international standards on, because many of them, for instance, happen to be oil-producing countries, and it's impossible to place any sort of international pressure on them with regards to human rights, because then they'll do exactly what they did in 1973 and 1979. They send the world into a massive economic crisis by raising oil prices. Thirdly, many of these religious states don't have any international obligations anyway. Iran and Yemen are either failed states or rogue states. They've decoupled themselves from the international community. So what have I shown you therefore? That within these countries, women themselves are divided, and some of them don't even want these rights. So there's no possibility of them achieving it. There's no possibility of us imposing it from the outside. And I've also shown you that I've tried to set the debate in a very weird way, which is probably wrong. That's why we are proud to stand here in proposition.
I thank the second proposition speaker for his speech, and to continue the case for the opposition, I call upon Stefan Budza.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, what do we have here today is the Singapore, the proposition side that is saying all these extreme examples about oil governing states that are, we can say they are totally unsecular because they are dictatorships. And why these examples do not stand at all? Because these states are dictatorships, and what are they're using? They're using religion as their benchmark. And we say that they have also state-funded churches, because they have, like for example, Saudi Arabia, they fund Islamic churches, but they misinterpret the religion, because as we have stated in our constructive case, religion can be interpreted in different ways. We all know that Quran doesn't say to kill non-believers, but they interpret it that way. They make it their own ideology. They use it in their own advantage. They misuse the religion. And what do we have here today? The government side is telling us these examples, these extreme examples in the Middle East. And what we are saying you are the states that we have today in Europe that are functioning very well because they have a state church. They have a church that they are funding, the one church that they believe in. Now, what can we see today? That if we are making this debate about examples, we have clearly shown, and our burden of proof is that we have to show that there are some states that have a state church and they have women equality. And we have totally proven to you through our examples. What do we have here from the government side are examples of dictatorships, are not examples about religious states, because you have dictatorships, for example, Ben Ali, Gaddafi, they're also dictators, but they use another ideology. The communism, no, thank you. The communism is total secularism. They have no religion, and they are dictatorships. So therefore, we can see that it doesn't matter how do you make your who is a dictator. They can use whatever they want, and they misuse the religion in these examples. So therefore, the examples don't stand. And also, they're talking about Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. These are not theocracies. These are the states that are funding the churches, as we can see today in the Western world. Also, you have stated that, well, in the United Kingdom is a secular state. But what can we see today in the United Kingdom? We have a state-backed church, the Protestant church. Queen and royal family can only be from Protestant church. And what the perception of the people in the United Kingdom is that the royal family is their ultimate representative. So? In the House of Lords, which is the House in Parliament of the United Kingdom, you cannot have a bishop who is not from Protestant church. Therefore, even in the government body, you cannot have it. And also, we have examples in the Church of England where you have women bishops. There are many women bishops, and we have stated they support. They are now discussing to have gay bishops. Therefore, we can see that church is changing. They are interpreting their opinion with the society. Because if you have a religion that is not backing the opinion of the society, because you have stated that well, people are going to just do whatever religion wants. But if religion is oppressing society, doesn't represent the opinion of the society, of the people, it is not going to be backed by, and therefore it's going to lose believers. As we can see in some states today in Europe that are losing believers because of it and becoming atheists. And therefore we say that this totally doesn't stand. No, thank you. Also, they have been mentioned in examples about the United States and women's rights movement. But women were oppressed even in the United States, which are a secular country. Therefore, you can see that secularism does not work in every condition. But I will go to the United States afterwards. One of the main examples is, well, these states, we cannot influence them because of the oil prices. Just a second. Please, you're making this debate about dictatorships that they can influence on us only because they have huge oil reserves. Therefore, you're not clearly talking to us about the concept of society, the concept of religion in society. Yes?
China is a dictatorship, but it has outstanding equality statistics for both men and women. It is not dictatorships that's the problem, it's religion.
Okay, China is a dictatorship, it's equal to women. I don't remember any prime minister from China who is a woman. I don't remember how many ministers in Chinese government are women. I know that, for example, in Denmark, there are 2 times more women than men in the parliament. Therefore, Denmark has a state religion. It has a state church. Now we'll go to our constructive case. I will firstly talk how secularism harms ultimate equality, and then why democracy can always achieve equality. Firstly, secularism has massive problems, because when you have a secular state, it says that, okay, we don't approve the church, we have a common sense, common opinion. And therefore, when people believe in the propaganda of the state that there is a common opinion, that because it's not influenced by the church, they're going to say that, okay, it's not influenced by the church, therefore it must be good. And therefore, it is a benchmark for men to oppress women, because they can say, okay, on the paper you have rights, we have common sense because we don't say anything we don't approve church dogma. Therefore, you must be equal. But what we can see today in many states, for example, in France, the World Economic Forum equality rate in France is 72%. But in Iceland is 85%, and Iceland is the country that has a state-funded church. And therefore, when you say that you're a secular country, not only that women can be oppressed and just there is no moral holder as we have when you have a state-funded church, but also you're making the other churches feel endangered. For example, in the United States, in Republican race, there was huge funding from Catholic Church, and every Republican candidate had signed that he is going to approve only laws that are given by God, so they are going to be against abortus and so on. So therefore, the church feels endangered, and therefore they make huge lobbies. Therefore, you have a huge competition in front of them. Therefore, they are going to oppress women. Not, for example, in the United Kingdom, when we have a state-funded church, but they are not oppressing women. There are many women in parliament, there are women bishops, and they have equal rights here. No, thank you. And also, therefore, states recognize there is a relationship between the government and the church, but the other churches can see, okay, the state recognizes there is a religion, therefore other churches are not going to feel oppressed because, for example, in the United Kingdom, we have Catholic churches that are funded, Catholic schools that are funded by government, we have Islamic schools that are funded by government, therefore there is no oppression. And also, why democracy can always achieve equality? What is democracy? Democracy is about equal chances for everyone. And therefore, in democracy, you have, as we can prove, you have democratic states that are not secular, and democracy is always going to achieve equality because women have equal rights. When women have equal rights, they are going to, we're going to have a bottom-up structure. The bottom-up structure is very good because then women can elect their representatives in the parliament. They can have, you can have a women prime minister, like for example, you have a lesbian woman prime minister in Iceland, and you're going to have a good bottom-up structure because people believe in bottom-up structures because they can influence them. If you have a top-up structure, like for example some dictatorship, you're going to feel, women are going to feel oppressed and everything. And therefore, you can have a church backed by government, but it is going to, but if people influence on the government, the main influence of the government is the people. Therefore, the church is going to be the moral authority of the values, and is going to achieve equality because church never propagates inequality, and therefore you're going to have achieving equality only because of democracy, because men's and women's voices are heard equally. And therefore, I beg you to oppose this motion. Thank you.
Now, we don't think Team Serbia has been very fair to the case of Team Singapore today. From the beginning of this debate, we gave you a fair, intuitive, and most importantly, debatable definition of what a religious state is. And as much as they tried to disguise it, Team Serbia came and gave us a definitional challenge. But most importantly, even if Team Serbia gave us a definitional challenge, that's what they based the entirety of their rebuttals around. Never once have they dealt head-on with the logic presented by my first speaker and my second speaker. In contrast, on Team Singapore, we've gone the extra mile. We've refuted the definitional challenge successfully, but we've been prepared to say, even if we accepted your definitional challenge, your points on your own terms are wrong. And I'm going to further show this by examining the debate through three areas. First, on the area of the definition. Second, on the area of religion's effects on governments. And finally, on the area of religion's effects on society. So let's go to my first point, on the definitional challenge. My second speaker, I apologize, came up and defended Team Singapore's definition by telling you a religious state has to be looked at through form and through function. No thank you, sir. The government of the United Kingdom does not make laws based on religion. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom does not claim to be ruling by virtue of religion. And to the common man on the street, we tell you the United Kingdom is clearly not a religious state. No, we never heard any response from their second speaker. We think this means that they've given up the definitional challenge. They might try and resurrect it in their third speaker, but we tell you this is too little and too late. But anyway, I'm going to add further layers to the defense of our definition. Let's take a look at Europe, for example. All the countries, they say, fund state churches must therefore be religious states. Really? Lots of these state churches are very fundamentally opposed to the law of abortion. But in many of these countries, like Italy, for example, abortion is legal. If these states were really religious states by virtue of them funding the state church, why do they have laws that fly directly in the face of what their state church wants them to do? Clearly, they can't be considered religious states. But let's go one step further. Even if we accepted Team Serbia's definition, that once the state funds something, then it becomes a state representing that thing. Hang on, the government of New Zealand funds some Maori arts and cultures. Does that mean that the government of New Zealand is a Maori government? The state funds lots of things all the time. It funds the arts, it funds Shakespeare. But that doesn't mean the state is defined by its art and by Shakespeare. The United Kingdom is not defined by the Anglican Church in any way as the United Kingdom is somehow defined by Shakespeare. We think our definition is by far the fairer one. But okay, as I promised, we're going to say, even if we accepted Serbia's definition, even if, and let's make it clear, we don't, we're going to take them their points on their own grounds and say, in any case, religion in these countries is still detrimental to women's rights. So let's go on to my next point of contention. What is the effect on religion on government? And here, I'm going to clash with the positive material presented by their second speaker. The first thing he told us was this: religion isn't the problem, dictatorships are the problem. We pointed out this is not actually true in a point of information. China, for example, is a dictatorial country, but has great results with women's rights. He told us we don't see any women in government. Really? The third in line in succession to the Chinese, throne, I guess, or great dictator, is the education minister, who happens to be a woman. The gang of six that ruled China during the period of Cultural Revolution comprised a woman. Mao, Chairman Mao, the great shining light of China, said, "Women hold up half the sky." And China is one of the largest participation of women in armed forces and in government offices. So we don't think that China is fundamentally anti-woman. But let's take this one step further. In any case, we tell you there's a very good reason why religious states tend to be dictatorships. And religious states tend to be dictatorships because, contrary to what Team Serbia believes, they use religion to impose their view of society on it, not accept what society believes. Adil, in his very first speech, if you wait a while, sir, I'll take you, gave examples about how conservative religions in these religious states oppress moderate splinter movements within their countries. They can't be democracies like this. That's why religious states tend to be dictatorships. Go on, sir.
You're saying all of your examples are about dictators who are using their religion, misinterpreting their religion in order to gain their own, for their own gain. Can you give us an example of the state that uses a religion and does not have a dictatorship?
Thank you very much. If you just waited a while, I'll be going on to this point right now. Team Serbia came up and told us that all these religious states misuse religion. And you know what? To a certain extent, we think that's true. We think that fundamentally speaking, this is not what the founders of this religion, the great people like Jesus and Muhammad, intended for these religions to be. But if you had listened carefully to my first speaker's speech, he told you religious states will always misinterpret religion in this way, because their legitimacy and their power is derived from an extremely fundamentalist and conservative interpretation of their religion. This might not be what Muhammad intended, but it's certainly what the Saudi government believes. The Wahhabi sect might be a fundamentalist sect that was definitely not in the progressive mind of Muhammad, but this is what the government of Saudi Arabia believes. And he further went on to tell you that they will always remain conservative because any concession to moderation is a direct attack on their source of legitimacy. So if Team Serbia had been listening and bothered to rebut my first speaker's case, they'd know that we'd already taken down their points. Next, the majority of Team Serbia's case seems to be based on a single example: England. Alright, we'll tell you that religion and the importance of the Anglican Church in England is actually something that is really bad for women's rights. As Team Serbia correctly pointed out, the royal family is the head of, well, England, and basically the succession to the royal family takes male precedence over female. We think that's a vast slap in the face for women's rights in England, because that means a woman of equal ability can never ascend to the throne simply because a male child happened to be born one after her. We think that's horrible. And in any case, even if we considered all down the way to their point about England, we tell you in a significant majority of religious states, the burden of proof that is on this debate for side proposition, we've taken the debate. They've completely failed to rebut any of our examples about the Middle East and our logic about the Middle East, which, as everyone knows, is the place with the vast majority of religious states. No thank you. So let's go on to my next point: the effects of religion on society. And here I want to resurrect my second speaker's point, because we don't think they've managed to touch this at all. In fact, if you listen carefully to my second speaker, he's already preemptively rebutted the majority of the material brought out by their second speaker point. Team Serbia's second speaker came out and said, bottom-up change is a really good thing. We want women to be able to vote for women in parliament. And we say, yes, that's good, but that's never going to happen under a religious state for precisely the same reasons that my second speaker brought up. It's not going to happen because the sort of societal pressure, the patriarchal structures imprinted upon society by a conservative interpretation of religion fundamentally means that such bottom-up change is never going to happen. And okay, I'll take you, sir.
Oh. Well, what you failed to provide us with is a logical connection between the claim that it is impossible to have democracy, say, in a country with a state religion, and what your second speaker said and what you are saying.
No, if you had listened to my speech earlier, I already told you it's impossible to have democracy in a fundamentally religious state because the people in charge of the religious state will never brook debate about their fundamentalist, conservative religious ideology, and democracy depends on debate. There can be no democracy there. Nick, and I want to say, going back to my point of rebuttal, I want to tell you to listen very carefully to what Team Serbia's second speaker said. He gave you a negative example, the fact that the Catholic Church funds American candidates. Hang on, isn't it a very good point for our side of the house? He said the sort of laws put in place by the American candidates are going to be anti-women and anti-gender equality. That's precisely what my side has been saying all along. Even if we accepted Team Serbia's definition of what a religious state is, the presence of religion in these countries is detrimental to women's rights. So because Team Singapore's definition is the correct and fair one, because religion has a negative effect for women's rights, both in governments and in society, go with this side of the house.
Okay, I thank the third proposition speaker for his speech, and now to continue the case for the opposition, I call upon Milana Milanovic.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, I'll start my speech with clarifying what is the proposition being trying to do, is limit the non-secular definition of non-secular state as the only religious states, basically only dictatorships, which is which they call fair, that will limit this debate about non-secular states only about dictatorships. So first, let's talk about the definition of a secular state. So a secular state is the state that doesn't support any specific religion. So that means it doesn't has a religion embodied in the system of how the government society works. So about definition of religion, we believe that Team Singapore agreed on our side. So I'll start off with summarizing this debate in 3 clash points. First clash point about religion, about what religion is, what the purpose of religion is and its influence.
Madam.
Second about, please no, finish. Second about secularism and how it achieves equality or not really. And thirdly about states, about equality and religion connection with the state. So about what religion is, we agreed about the definition. So about religion. So and they stated to us, and we agreed that religion influences the state, and that it's created it's created as a way of governing people, as a way of control. So what they tried to tell us that the needs of the purpose of the church is very pragmatic, to control people. So what they tried to tell us that the way that people needed to be controlled 2,000 years ago is the same as the way that what the church needs to do now. So
Point of information, Matt.
Okay.
Can you be the first person on your side of the house to explain to us why the nature of a government is defined by things apart from its form and its function.
Okay, so what you're trying to say is that religion is not defined by its function. So I'm going to talk about how, because religion is so pragmatic, it has a definite function, and it reflects the moral opinion of the society. It also depends a lot about interpretation. So basically interpretation of the religion is a reflection of the moral opinion of the people. So if the public opinion and the social tendency is towards women equality, its morals will be towards it. So the interpretation of the church itself would change. Okay, so I will talk about my second point about secularism and how does it achieve equality or not. So basically what I'm saying is that democracy achieves equality and not secularism, because democracy and principles of democracy means that both men and women are the same. So what we talk to you about is about problems with secularity. Because when you don't have a state, because when state doesn't support a church, that means that churches in those states feel endangered, like we clearly shown you, and that the church's rights are not guaranteed, which is harmful for the system, because then you have religious communities that tend to be defensive and perceive the state as the body which is attacking their religious views. So you have, for example, all Republicans in the USA signing basically a paper which says they are against abortion, and it's clearly against the rights, the fundamental rights of women. So what we have under secularity is the false security that this system promotes equality. So we have a false security and no church to back up its moral opinion that women should achieve equality. So no church to reflect this moral tendency, like we have in the state religions, for example. So I'll now proceed to our third clash point, equality and how is religion related to church. So we have major examples like Iceland and Norway, which have which are the top two countries which achieve equality. Okay?
Can you be the first speaker on your side of the house to rebut my first speaker's point that in secular states you can debate about these sort of anti-women laws and have them struck down?
Okay, so basically what you're saying that in Iceland, where you have non-secular systems, you cannot debate about women's rights, and you have the most women's rights, and not only women but minority rights and things like that. So the statement that religion can achieve equality is basically what Team Singapore based the case on is that religion the definition of religion can achieve equality, which is basically not true, because we have Lutheran Church, which is governed by a female who is also lesbian and promotes all kinds of women equality. So what we are seeing today is state churches that promote women equality and equality of all kinds. So it's
Madam.
Okay, so basically what you have is in the UK is that you have a queen. The queen is a female, and she is a head of a Anglican church.
Madam, can you be the first speaker on your side of the house to rebut my point where I said, how can these countries be considered religious states if they enact laws that fly in the face of what their state church wants them to do?
Yeah, okay, so these states are religion because deeply in their society they have both the government and they have a religion along it's like the moral part of the state, and that means that people respond to the state as the state is governing them in terms of laws and things like that. When it comes to because they don't feel threatened about the state trying to attack their religious views. What we have is bottom-up changes that are in tune with their religious beliefs. And what we have is, like, for example, in the parliament we have priests, and they don't speak in the name of God; they speak in the name of people. So the reason they are stating are the reasons of people. So what we stated today is first that the definition is not correct. Second, that secularism creates false security, and it has problems which are creating the inequality even more, advancement even slower, and that that was clearly stated examples and the tendency of churches and states with states that are not secular, church that have state churches, are tending to achieve inequality and will achieve inequality. Thank you.
We now move to the team's 4-minute reply speeches. The opposition will go first. There will be no points for information offered during the reply speeches. After 3 minutes, there'll be a bang. Once to signal you've got 1 minute left, and at 4 you'll have a double bang to signal that that should be the end of your speech. To deliver the opposition's reply speeches, I call upon a member of the Serbian team.
What do we have in this debate today? We have a government side that has proposed us a definition about dictatorships that use religion as their reliable source. But what do we have? What is the motion today? That we have to prove that women can only achieve equality under secular rule of government. And we have clearly shown it throughout the examples that, for example, in France, it's 72% of women who have equality. In Singapore, it's 69%, but in Iceland and Norway, it's 85%. And Iceland and Norway have a state church. And why is that very important? Because when you have a state church, you as a state recognize its existence and you rely on it. Yes, we have, for example, right now in United Kingdom, we have a church that is debating about gay priests. We have churches advancing. It is following the people's what people want to do. It's people's opinion. Because if church doesn't stand with the people, there is no need for its existence. It's going to lose people. And we have clearly shown you that if people that the church is a moral holder of the values, and therefore government relies on the church as a moral holder of the values in the societies. Therefore, if you have a state-backed church, it is not a secular state. And the government side has only shown us that in cases of misinterpretation of the religion in dictatorships, you have very bad women's rights. And they say that their church influences totally on the society. But they have stated, for example, in Saudi Arabia, that king has said that women can go to universities. Therefore, he didn't say what the state religion wanted him to do. Therefore, they can do something else other than state religion wants them to do. Therefore, they are opposing it. Therefore, there is not a direct influence. Therefore, it is not theocracy. It is state with their own state church. Therefore, it is similar to Iceland, to United Kingdom, to Denmark, to Norway, but it is a dictatorship. That is a fundamental difference. And our burden of proof has been to prove you that in these kind of cases, when you have a state-backed religion, that you can achieve equality for women. Also, we have shown you that if you have a state-backed church, you have an unsecular state, and you have democracy, women can achieve rights. You have stated that, yes, we can debate in secular states about rights, but we can debate only when there is a democracy. Can you debate in China? You cannot debate in China. China doesn't approve any minorities. You are saying about human rights in China. I mean, what are you saying that in China everybody can achieve human rights? We know that China doesn't do well about human rights and not even women's rights. And also, right now we have a queen in United Kingdom who is the head of church. Therefore, there is a woman who is the head of church. You can have women in Lutheran church in Sweden. You have women she is lesbian and she is the head of church. In Iceland, you have women prime minister who is a lesbian, and you have a state-backed religion. And therefore, we can see that that religion is following what people think. The state is following what religion thinks, and therefore there is not direct. There is not direct. The state doesn't do whatever church says them to do, but there is a huge influence on it, and therefore it is not a secular state. And throughout all this debate, we haven't heard any response from the government side about our arguments that you can only achieve equality if there is a democracy, and what do they think that if you have a state church, there is the other religions are going to be also represented, and they haven't shown us that actually the bottom-up, the democracy is the right way, not secularism, and they have clearly not shown us why in secular states and how in secular states you can achieve equality for women. They have only shown us examples of states that use religion as their back to have dictatorships, and therefore we say that this motion has fallen. Thank you.
For his speech, and then to conclude the debate for proposition and indeed the debate as a whole, I call upon a member of Team 64.
You're all probably at least a little bit confused. But let me try and clear that up by asking a few of the simplest questions I can possibly think of. Firstly, what are religious states? Secondly, can they give women equality? And thirdly, can secularism give equality? So firstly, what are religious states? Let's just understand that this debate was one about systems of government. It wasn't about one particular aspect of what the government chose to fund. It was about the entire system of an entire government. We chose two very reasonable criteria, we thought, today. We talked about the government's form. Does it justify its existence by fundamentally tying it to a religious institution? Secondly, its function. Does it justify the sort of laws it makes through religious doctrine, and do these try and systemically oppress certain non-religious groups or other religious groups in society? We thought these were fairly intuitive and reasonable definitions to have. They challenged it by saying, but certain governments fund other groups. We said, first of all, but if you really think that the government relies on these groups, a word the last speaker used to describe the relationship, if governments really rely on these religious states, we asked you from the first speaker to the very last one, why is it that governments pass laws which are in direct contravention of what these religious groups want to see happening in society? If you agree that these societies are structured around a religion, how can this happen? We heard no response. We pointed out that governments also fund many things for many cultural reasons. We fund traditional arts, we fund traditional languages, we fund traditional religions because those might be important to our cultural identity. Again, we heard no response. Last of all, we gave you a very good reason why religious states tend to be dictatorships. Because the point at which a government says, my mandate comes from a religious authority, the point at which a government can ignore the democratic will of its people by discriminating against a large group of them who happen to be from a different religion, that's when it stops becoming a democracy. That was also logic we brought out from our very opening rebuttal speaker, and we sustained it down the table. We never heard any response. So on this fairly basic issue of what is a religious state, we think we clearly took the ground. But let's move on then to the second key issue. Can these states give women equality? Ado came out and gave you a lot of analysis, deep analysis, which was unfortunately sidelined by the fact they made a strange strategic decision. They chose instead to say, these are irrelevant examples, we want to talk instead about Norway and Denmark and Sweden. Ado's analysis was that these states entrench patriarchal religious structures. That religion is something which is designed to control society, and often states which adopt religion and make it part of the laws they pass do so because they want to oppress members in society and they want to cement that sort of rule. Again, analysis which we brought up very early in the debate, but they seem very, very reluctant to touch. I furthermore talked to you about why in some of these religious states, the fact that the ideology is so permissively accepted throughout the whole society means that organic feminist movements also cannot emerge. What did they say again? They said we only wanted to talk about Sweden and Denmark. Never mind the fact that we clash on them on their own grounds. on all our rebuttal speakers when we said, in fact, in these states where we do have religious institutions affiliated with the states, there are problems, and we think these are unjust as well. They never came back to any of these problems. On to the last, therefore, and the final issue, the smallest one they tried to bring up at the very end of the debate. Can secularism give equality? They talked about a sense of false security. But Rente gave you a very simple response. He said, wait a minute, if you think this is a problem in secular states, how much worse is this problem going to be in religious states when the religious justifications used by some people in secular states now gain even more weight and power? And we furthermore extended this argumentation by talking about how Adil had mentioned that we can debate about all of these sorts of issues in secular states anyway, and that there are institutions in these countries which are designed to protect women's rights too. And on this issue, once again, which they tried to bring up at the very end, they backtracked and they never came back with a proper response. What am I showing you then? We came up with a reasonable definition, we wanted to have a reasonable debate, but even if we didn't manage to agree on that, we've shown you why religious states can never give women the rights they deserve, only secular states do so. We are proud to propose.
Hi everyone. Firstly, I would like to congratulate both teams. I think everyone at this whole tournament has been dreading this motion for like a month. I don't know if you in the audience can appreciate how complicated what they were asked to discuss in this motion is, but they made it look so much easier than it actually was to prepare this debate. So I would like to give them, on behalf of me and everyone at the tournament, a round of applause for managing this. To explain the way that judging works, for those of you who aren't familiar, apologies to those of you who are, there are 3 criteria that we judge on at World Schools. Style, which is the way that speakers speak, you know, their tone of voice, their gestures, you know, like I'm doing a great job of now. Secondly, their content, so what they say, the examples they use, how they make their arguments. And finally, strategy, so how they structure their speech, how they structure their case overall, and how good their strategy of tackling their opposition is. So those are the criteria that the 3 judges on the panel used to come to their conclusion today. And I'm pleased to announce it's been a unanimous decision in today's debate. That means all 3 judges have agreed as to who won this morning's debate. And so across the 3 categories of style, content and strategy, all 3 judges thought that one team had an advantage across all 3 of the criteria. But we wanted to emphasise in this kind of very, hopefully short speech, content and strategy in terms of the advantages that existed there. So we thought firstly, with respect to the definitional issue, or the issue of the reasonableness of what is and isn't a non-secular state, that obviously this is a very complicated issue that the teams had to deal with in today's debate. We thought that both teams had definitions that could potentially be considered reasonable, but we thought that one team was better able to justify their definition, and we thought that one team was better able to deal with a multitude of responses. So even if their definition wasn't correct, they were willing to deal with the grounds, the opposition's grounds on that count. And we thought that that was a sophisticated response to that issue from that particular team, and so we thought that that was particularly good. With respect to content, the arguments that were put forward by the team, we think that both teams could have done better to respond comprehensively to the arguments of the team they were against. We thought both teams left arguments standing that probably didn't need to be left standing in this morning's debate, and both teams could have done a little bit of a better job in directly engaging with their opposition. But we did think that one team did a better job at comprehensively dealing with their opposition's case, and we thought that that team also had a broader variety of responses to the opposition's case. Finally, we thought that one team also had an advantage in the asking and accepting of points of information. So that's the thing where people jump up and say things at people. We thought that, what a great example I just gave. We thought that one team dealt better with points of information in their own speeches and in offering those points of information. And so in a unanimous decision, this debate has gone to Singapore.
On behalf of Team Singapore, I'd just like to say a few words. First of all, thank you so much to our opposition for a wonderful debate, to the judges for coming out and judging it, and most importantly to our audience who was dragged here at some godforsaken hour to watch, but hopefully been not too boring. Thank you guys so much.